Hello and welcome this week to Together We Feel here at the Embracing Layers Network. Welcome to our YouTube channel and this important conversation today that I'm going to be having. And it's around the topic of the impact of our invisible work. And this is something that we're starting to hear a little bit of conversation around. Our guest today point that out in their research and in their work on their website. Time Magazine's made some mentions of it. I literally yesterday on my LinkedIn saw someone talk about how her day was only half over when she got home from work. And so we're starting to hear some scuttle, but what you all have uncovered, my guests today here have uncovered in this is really something where I'm like, how have we not been talking about this yet? How have we not put a name to this? Because when you start looking at all of the things that fall within this, it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's really kind of mind-blowing. But I have Dr. Janelle Wells and Dr. Doreen MacAulay here with me today. Mike Frisbee from Frisbee and Associates reached out to me in December, introduced me to Janelle and Doreen, was like, I think you should, I think they'd be worth your time to have, a conversation with. And so I was like, I'm like, oh my gosh, absolutely. So we set up a time to have a Google Meet, and it was just, oh yeah. I don't have room on my podcast right away, but we're going to get you all on YouTube as soon as I can and introduce you to our audience and this work you're doing, because I think everybody needs to know about this. It creates more conversations. I told my husband, he's a vice president at a university and has a lot of leadership responsibilities, has a lot of women working for him, a lot of minority groups in working for him, because of the space we're in. I'm like, he's a girl dad. He was raised by a fiercely independent Irish woman who did not believe in gender roles. So he's wonderful. But I was like, you need to listen to this YouTube I'm putting out today, and you need to get this book that we're going to be talking about today from Janelle and Doreen, because you're going to be like, whoa, it's just going to make you think about and look around your team and think about, where is this place I can simply say thank you more or even acknowledge. But welcome both of you to this YouTube panel today. Before we get into it, I want to give people a little background on the two of you. So let me get into your bios real quick to make sure we're giving y'all, if I can get my computer to do that. It's early morning. It's like, why are we up? Okay, here we go. Early morning on the West Coast, not on the East Coast. Early morning on the West Coast. All right. So let's start with Dr. Janelle E. Wells. She loves to learn, lead, and lift are hallmarks of Dr. Janelle E. Wells' life. Through her love of sport, Dr. Wells earned a collegiate athletic scholarship, progressed into the coaching ranks, and then transcended into the private sector and classroom as a professor of practice after earning her doctorate from the University of Florida. A lifelong learner, Dr. Wells' lived experiences stimulated her research in organizational behavior, specifically leadership, career development, and gender equity, which has been published in outlets such as the Journal of Sport Management, the Leadership and Organizational Development Journal, Sport Marketing, and Sport Marketing Quarterly, in addition to 30-plus peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. In 2019, she co-edited the book, The Business of Esports, The Wild West on Fire. Boy, isn't that true? Oh, my goodness. Putting theory into practice, Wells is the co-founder of Wells Quest, which you're going to hear more about later, folks. Most recently, she partnered with the Vinix Sports Group, the parent company of the Tampa Bay Lightning, to create the Lightning Leadership Line, a personal and professional development initiative. Lifting with her servant heart, and living with it too. Dr. Wells finds fulfillment developing students as an associate professor at the University of South Florida, serving her community as an advisory board member of the YMCA and empowering women as a founding board member of Women in Sports and Events, WISE, Tampa Bay, and founding research fellow for Wasserman's the collective think tank. Dr. Wells' most meaningful purpose is raising 3 active young boys with her husband. All right, that's our friend Dr. Wells. Now we've got Doreen, Dr. MacAulay. Doreen MacAulay is a facilitator, author, and university instructor with 20 plus years of experience in organizational and personal development. Doreen is passionate about creating equity in the workplace, as well as helping people develop their authentic and effective selves. Using her background in organizational behavior, she facilitates the professional development of people so that they can realize their goals and aspirations. MacAulay is an award-winning instructor at the Muma College of Business, University of South Florida, where she teaches in the fields of leadership, organizational behavior, and management to undergraduate, graduate, and executive students. She has worked with Fortune 100 and 500 corporations, nonprofit organizations, and academic institutions to help develop and enhance their approach to DEI through interactive and customized workshops. Ooh, that DEI work right now. Boy, that's a whole, we could do a whole another show on that. We'll come back for that another day. She holds a Ph.D. in management from St. Mary's University in Nova Scotia, Canada. Doreen's research focuses on gender equity, organizational change, and identity. She has lectured at various academic institutions within the United States, Canada, China, and Spain. So you can see all why I was so excited to have these 2 women here today. Welcome, ladies, to Together We Feel.
Oh, and thank you, Melissa, and the whole community of Together We Feel. I can even just feel your energy in the voice, and see it. So thank you for that. And really that transfer, that contagious spirit. And so I know, as you talked about when we first met in a prep call, we talked for like an hour, but we could have talked for the whole day of so many synergies and so many opportunities to really empower and uplift one another. So thank you for that space.
Absolutely. And Doreen, welcome to you. I'm so happy to have you both here together.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you so very much. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to have a discussion, to share this ideas that we have. But as well, I want to echo what Janelle said about the energy. The energy you bring to bringing light to these things is really fabulous. And so thank you for inviting us in to be part of it. It's really great.
Absolutely. I'm honored to. And I'm in my head all the time thinking about other ways I can incorporate you too, because you're talking about the things that I am so passionate about. I am so, and so we're going to get started today, and I'm going to keep myself on task because we could be on here for hours going in a variety of different directions of why I love these conversations with the 2 of you. All right. How did you meet? And what guided you in deciding, because you have your own different separate backgrounds, so what brought you together and help you to decide to do this book that we're going to be talking about today that's so important, as well as Wealth Quest in general? I mean, where your partners, you're doing leadership development, talent management, business strategy, cultural competencies with other partners as well. And that's going to be linked on our website. But what brought you together and decided now's the time to write this book, Our Invisible Work? It's time now.
Yeah. Well, I'll start and then I'll pass it to Doreen in there. I think it really is all about timing, because even though Doreen and I had met 10 plus years ago, we were in the thick of it. I had my 3rd child and she had her first child. And so it might have been just under 2 years old, but we were also starting out our careers at USF. Right. And so sometimes you are so focused on that. And I remember going out to a few lunches and always enjoying our conversation, but like, where could that fit in our bandwidth?
Sure.
Right. But then we're going to fast forward a little bit. And her and I were always very close because we did teach a similar class. And what was beautiful about that is that we were able to bounce ideas off each other. Okay. But then I'm going to take it to the pandemic, where none of us want to go back to.
I know.
Right. When that hit in March of 2020, well, that summer, Doreen and I, while the world was sometimes disconnecting and separating, I think that summer brought Doreen and I closer than ever than we had in our relationship before, and it allowed us to really see one another. And if we all go back to that time, a very dark, a very difficult time, her and I, I'm not going to speak for her, but I know us, like, there were so many things that we were doing, particularly as women, as mothers, educators, our service, how we were emotionally supporting not only our students, right, but others in the community. And so we really bonded over that, but we also recognized that some of our colleagues weren't doing that same thing. The amount of work, but when we say, yes, we might be different, but our work complements one another.
Sure.
Okay. And so about 4 years prior to that, in 2016, the impetus really to our invisible work had been a student coming into my office and in tears. And to contextualize a little bit, our students, my graduate students, work 3 days a week for one of our partners and then take their MBA classes 2 days a week. And she was going through, at that time, she called microaggressions. I would have said macroaggressions.
Yeah.
Yes, as a young Black female, but she was so worried her scholarship was going to be taken. And at that time, I go, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, I value all the work. We're going to do something to fix this. Okay. And so I just started, but then I also reflected on this invisible work, because once we brought it to that organization for them to see it, okay, and that's why our book is called Our Invisible Work, and the IN is in parentheses, because while it had been invisible to that organization, it was visible to her and I. And so what we wanted this book to do is bring visibility to all the work that we do. Okay. And so we were able to go back to that organization, create some training, make it better. Right. Yeah. But I had started to write this book, and that was 2016. But that was probably the last thing on the totem pole, that we just kept going down, down, down. And when Doreen and I started to work in our classes and redoing our organizational behavior and leadership class during the summer of 2020, we started to really bond over this, and hearing her work as a historian and studying identity and roles, and then our love for equity and our shared passion for that, and our shared frustration.
Yeah, absolutely. As two women in higher ed, which has its own special place in this story.
Yes. And so it was a great collaboration, but it was also what I was missing, and so in partnership, we know that together we're going to go further. And that really allowed the book to take a different shape in a different direction. It wasn't the last iteration, in 2021.
Right.
At first, it was written from this place of frustration, kind of resentment. And that isn't, when hearing Doreen and I more, you realize that isn't us. We are these rays of sunshines.
Yeah.
And so we did get it to a place of hope. And so that's where we are now. But Doreen, what did I miss in that story?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just to kind of, I guess, maybe talk a little bit about how I was easily convinced to come into the discussion. Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the things that when I was doing my PhD work, a lot of it revolved around identity. So that was kind of one of the main areas that I did. And one of these great moments I had during my PhD moments was talking about how, women, especially when we look at like the liberal feminist movement, right? When we came into the workplace, we kind of came in with this idea that we had to be like men to be successful. Right. And it was this realization during my time of study that we don't have to be, though. Why can't we make our own understanding of what that is? So I've always had this idea. So I got my PhD in 2013 and had this idea in the back of my head. But I remember speaking to one of my very respected colleagues about it. I was like, how am I going to get this message out? How am I going to talk about this? And he said the only way you could do it is to write a book of fiction, because you know what? No one's going to listen to it. Right. And it was this idea of, well, women.
Can I stop you for a minute?
Sure.
Quick? I want to add to that. This is not the first time I've heard that story. I literally had a panel focused on authors with books. She is an educator at a business school in New York, in the city. She released her first fiction book and was really kind of afraid to tell people in academia that she was doing a fiction book because of all of the prestige around all of these other nonfiction things she'd done. Because her work is around the impact on the people when you do make these business decisions. So she talks the human story.
Yes.
You would love her another day again for another. But she said that what happens is, when people are confronted with a topic that is outside of their comfort, they will only get involved or engaged in it if it's fiction.
Love that. It's so
They
true.
will not buy nonfiction
Yes.
of something that's outside of their comfort zone, but in fiction, they're willing to go on the adventure. So this is
Absolutely.
not the first time I've heard
I
that. So I
love this.
wanted to point it
Oh,
out.
please, absolutely. You have got to hook us up with that individual to have a discussion
yes.
further.
I will.
love that.
I will.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, so yeah, on that. So this individual told me that it has to be. And so then I was like, okay, so I kind of just put it in the back. And then when we start to work together with Janelle, and Janelle, brought this idea forward and said, because, one of the things with Janelle, she loves to work on a team. Right? That's a coach in her. That's the athletic and the athlete in her, right?
Yes,
and so she loves that team environment, right? And so she's like, would you be willing to work on this? And it was like everything fell into place. I was like, yes, because this can be our platform to tell the story that the experience of a woman in the workplace, experience of a woman at home, they are, they're very different. And we have to be talking about it because we have to change it, but we have to change it with everyone else, right? And this is why the hour part. And so, when Janelle says that the first iteration seemed a little, more negative, darker, right? And we really felt like it was only speaking to the people who were experiencing it. You know what I mean? And so, but if we really want change, everyone has to be in on the conversation. And that's why, and, we are very much about, feed forward, making ourselves better. And so we actually, had people help us, read the work, helped us see that we weren't inviting everyone into the conversation. Yeah. And so that's what we wanted to do. So that's why with that hour piece came into it, the brackets of the end to the visible, we really were like, no, everyone needs to be having this discussion if we're going to see that there are these differences and that we can then move forward for change.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to get the people that have the power to make the change involved in the conversation. I mean, I talk about this all the time. On my network, it's like we are about women. We are about creating safe spaces for women. We are about bringing women together and working together collectively as a team. Because like you said earlier, you get more done together than you do on your own. But that involves bringing men into the conversation too. Because in so many spaces still, they're in the position to make the decisions. They have the power and the deposits in the bank to do the things that might be more controversial, to let the people know it's not okay to completely interrupt all the time Dr. MacAulay and Dr. Wells when they're bringing up points in meetings. We're going to let them finish, and then you can have your say. I mean, it's got to be somebody with some deposits in the bank in order for people to take notice. And that can be also women that have been in these workplaces for a while. I'm always talking about recognize your privilege and where you stand and how much you have in the bank, and are you in a position to lift somebody else up with you and maybe speak up to those powers that they might be too scared to or nervous to because of the repercussions. So this book needs to be in all those hands of those people that have the power and lack of fear of repercussions, or again, enough deposits in the bank they can afford to cash a few of those in
to be able to absolutely
exactly and take some risk. So thank you so much for that.
And if I could just actually, if you will, Melissa, you said that, I want to kind of make sure that, because it is really important what you said there. There needs to be safe spaces for us to have these conversations still, because I think in some ways we forget that we're not alone, right? That we're in this together. And so that's why I want to echo that it is really important to have a safe space like this where people can have women talking about these issues that can understand, so that we feel empowered to then go into, to broader kind of environments or environments where those discussions can happen, because I think we need to realize that we have the support of one another to be able to have those really difficult conversations. So I think having both is really important.
Absolutely. Yes. We've got to empower those of us and come together communally. Because when you go in a group versus going separately, there's just a lot more power behind you. You're going to get less pushback because there's just power in numbers. I mean, there just really is. That's so important. So I will be, when we're finished recording this and we put the recording out in the world to share on other platforms, I will be on my LinkedIn far and wide, like every single leader needs to listen to this conversation, get this book, have these conversations in your environments, and not just your work environments, your homes, your social constructs, your church spaces, all the spaces that we inhabit, because you see it happening everywhere. Which leads me to, I want to read a couple of quotes from a couple of different articles. One's on your website, another one's from Psychology Today. And I want to read both of those and then get your thoughts on this, because this is like this. I could have read both of the whole articles, but I'm like, no, people, you can go to their website and find that, and we'll get to that later. But these parts really stuck out to me. And the first one is from the article, Blacks Experience Invisible Work and Stereotype Management on the Job. And a paragraph from that says, many people, particularly women, are encumbered by invisible work, with women in the U.S. spending an average of 4.1 hours per day. That's half a workday on unpaid household chores and caregiving, and men 2.5 hours per day. But as we outline in our new book, Our Invisible Work, the emotional toll and daily stress is even greater. On Blacks who also must navigate macro, micro aggressions, they're not so micro on the people that are happening to them, and racism as they perform their duties in the workplace. This emotional burden is a significant and often harmful aspect of their invisible work. So that's the first quote. And it's like, just look at the studies. Black women's rates of so many breast cancer, heart disease, stroke, all these different things, their life expectancies are shorter than white women. And it goes back to these stressors that contribute to the inflammation and all of the things that contribute to these diseases. It's no surprise in that. And when you lay it out, like, well, of course. But so that's one. The second one is from an article that you wrote in Psychology Today. In the modern era, invisible work has evolved beyond household chores, caregiving, and life admin, the office type work it takes to run a home. It now includes emotional labor, organizational tasks, mentoring, and other behind-the-scenes efforts that contribute to the smooth functioning of individuals, families, and organizations. These efforts can range from planning birthday celebrations for office colleagues to cleaning up communal office kitchens and taking notes at meetings. The psychological toll of invisible work can be profound and devastating, underscoring the importance of recognizing and valuing the contributions of those who do invisible work. With increased diversity in the workplace, we also now appreciate that invisible work is influenced not just by gender, but also factors such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, neurodiversity, disability, sexuality, and other expressions of identity and potential marginalization. In today's fast-paced and interconnected world, the concept of work has expanded beyond traditional job descriptions on sites like Indeed, and includes offline responsibilities that often don't show up on performance reviews. I mean, I read those just those two paragraphs alone, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They stop you. Even us rehearing it, you can see us like, wow. And I think before we do respond and dissect it a little bit and unpack it a little more, I want to make sure that we're all on the same baseline of defining invisible work. I think that's really important for the audience and everyone here. It's all work, physical or mental or emotionally, that is done for someone else without the acknowledgement of the time, effort, or contribution. And I just think that's really important that we set that stage, because yes, we're always going to do work for ourselves.
Sure.
But it's for the others, right? When that isn't recognized, isn't acknowledged.
Yeah.
Okay? So
And it's
really
expected.
Oh, key term. It becomes expected. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think so many times, so you might do it one time just to be like, oh, I'm the new employee, I'm going to be a helper. And then it's just all of a sudden it's like, oh, then it's just expected that you do it. And I'm like, well, I didn't say I'd do it every time, but now it's expected and I don't want to get in trouble and I don't want to disappoint. And I don't know what kind of repercussions there'll be if there's any pushback. Those are the things that I think come to mind. So go ahead and give me your thoughts hearing that back again, because then I want to, after that, tack on the talking points that we use so much here at our framework, that I use on our field podcast with our guests on there that are in direct conflict, and how do we work around that? But here you talk about hearing that back. What are some additional realizations or refreshers that come to you?
Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things for me, I think, is that the discussions don't happen enough. I think that's the biggest thing I would say. So when you're giving those statistics and people are seeing that, unfortunately, I think we do need to have the analytics behind things sometimes to convince people of things.
Like
right?
data.
So, exactly. So we need to have the data to be able to do that. And so it is good to have that. But I think if we really look at kind of the assumptions that we make. So, when you hear these things about there's this extra stress that people have, or, if some of your listeners, fall into some of these categories and they're experiencing that extra stress, it is to be able to first name it, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that we're trying to do with this book and any of the conversations that we're having, is that when we think about this invisible work, we need to first name it so that people can kind of then be able to give us the credit, give us the thank you, or show us that appreciation. So, to your point about how when we start something and we do it, especially if we're, new in an organization or something of that nature, I always think back to, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, Melissa, on this one, but, when we got our first car that had automatic windows, right? We went from having a roll
it down.
Exactly, right? So when we went to our first car that had automatic windows, that was a big deal. And it was like, it got noticed. It was like, wow, right? And that's kind of what it is. Like, if you do something kind for someone, it gets like this wow originally, but then find a car now. Maybe you might find a Jeep once in a while that has a roll. Everyone has the automatic, right? And so what becomes that the unexpected then becomes the routine or the expected, right? So the unexpected becomes the expected. And we have to really recognize that. So because when we do things, especially, and this is where I know I fell into the trap, right? Brand new employee. I want to make my mark. I want to do, and this is an easy way for me to do it, right? But once you do something and you don't get that acknowledgement for it anymore, or it becomes expected, that's when we have to start to have a real conversation with people to say, okay, it's great. It's wonderful for us to do this, but how is it going to then be either considered in my job description, or consider that I get to take a weight off of somewhere else to be able to do this? What does that look like? And I think that's the biggest thing. And then the other one I want to kind of, because you had kind of given us the two kind of ideas, right? And the one from the first article, really realizing that we all in some time and in some place may be the one with the privilege. Right? Privilege is not something that you always have or never have, right? Because when we're in different scenarios or different situations, when we have the power of the voice, we then need to be able to use that, right? So, because if we look at the experience of a Black woman versus the experience of a white woman, they're completely different things. But if we're in an environment that is male dominated, well, then we may have that less privilege together. But if we're in an environment where it's predominantly white, right? Well, then we, as white females, we may have the power at that time. So when do we use that, and understanding that is not a, that may be dynamic, right? And so and for us all to realize that when we do have that position of privilege, we need to, and we should exercise it, right? So that's
Yeah.
just those are kind of the two things that I wanted to bring up from those, because yes, I think it's one of those, if you when you're reading through the work, you'll probably hopefully relate to some of it, and then sometimes maybe you won't relate to it, but you have to think at that point, who are they talking about here, and how am I not seeing this person, right? And that's what I would ask, the people in your network to think about. Even if you don't see yourself in it, think about the people around you, and who are we talking about? Because this work is born from the stories of individuals, right? So these are stories that are about people. These statistics are about real people, right? And so how do we kind of bring that and really kind of understand that ourselves to be able to be that person that maybe brings visibility to someone else's work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right,
It
Janelle.
also reminded me of the versatility of each of us, each person, right? Because even weaved in there, as you're saying some of these stats and the emotional labor and the intersectionality of our roles and identity. Yes, I might be at work, right? And so I'm prioritizing, that work. However, I get a phone call from my mother's in the hospital and there's an emergency. I'm going into, caretaker mode immediately. And that's really humanizing, right? And so it reminds me of that. But sometimes, and it's interesting because I really think that COVID unveiled this, right? Because you're in my home now, right? Whether I invited you or not.
Me too. Yeah.
Right. So you're going to see and you're going to learn things about me that you may never have before. But now that gray is a little bit wider, right? Between that blurred. And so we have to really humanize the people. And I think it's very difficult for some over others because nope, when I'm at work, some people can compartmentalize better than others.
Yeah.
Right. Where other generations, this is me. This is all of me.
Oh yeah. That generational piece. Yes.
And so it really reminded me of that we have to understand the versatility. And I know Dr. MacAulay is much more well-versed in this of the intersectionality of the roles and identities, but so many more conversations I'm having is they only know how to show up as dad, not ex-husband, father, co-parent, all those things, all these identities that you are, right?
Yeah,
and it's
all
very
the roles.
So conscious of it, right? To really make sure that community is invited in and understand.
Yeah, I love that community piece and that recognizing your roles and being really stepping back a little bit and taking a look at all these things that apply. I mean, having that student come in, Dr. Wells, to your office to talk about meeting that right where it's at. I mean, and I think that's another thing that's so important. I talk about this all the time. And I learned this from my time at Her Story when I lived in New York, Her Story Writers Network. It was something that really became very real for me, even more so because I was in a room on a consistent basis with people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all ethnicities, socioeconomic spaces, faith spaces, parts of the world, all of the things, genders, identities, all of those. And the power of someone's story to stop you in your tracks and realize my truth is not the only truth. That is my lived experience. But there is no realm where I can have this immigrant's experience. I'm not an immigrant. I can't walk in her shoes, but I can listen to her story. I can help support her, make her feel safe, and tell other people her story. And so much of that is what you're doing in our invisible work is that there. It's we've got data behind it, but these are people and this is happening to people. So talk to me. So Dr. Wells, when you went back to this organization that this young woman, what was there, and you don't have to give the whole story away, but I'm curious about their response and doable action items that you gave them to start putting into place to avoid situations like this moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first, it was very receptive. Number one, because we did have a relationship, with their HR department. And so first, they were very appreciative even to bringing it to their attention. Again, the Doreen said in the opening, right? We've got to bring visibility to it. Because if we can't
Right.
name it, how can we fix something that we can't name?
Right.
Right?
And we assume when people aren't acting that they're villains. And maybe it's just a fact that they just didn't know.
Mhm.
And that can be frustrating sometimes. We're like, how can you not know? They didn't. They're not their status, their role, whatever it is in there doesn't put them in that scenario, or it's been a long time since they've been there. So they just didn't know. So going back to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was first and foremost, right? And it was a welcomed conversation, right? And together, what was great is that we leaned on each other's strengths. Yes, we build curriculum in this space, whether it's Wells Quest, we can build curriculum.
Right.
We're also instructors in higher education. We're professors in higher education. So all of that helped, but they also know their audience, right? How can we best meet their audience? What has their training and development looked like thus far? And where can we help fill those white spaces together? And so it was a very collaborative approach. And what I also loved is that the student was a part of making it better.
How empowering for her.
Yeah. And a lot, like the courage and bravery, number one, just to come into my office.
Absolutely.
We say this, like, yes, people say they have open doors, but you have to invite students in. You have to invite people in.
Yeah, open doors and feeling safe to actually walk through that door and be honest and authentic are two different things.
Absolutely. Right. And we know that was some of our frustration earlier, because we do invite as faculty members. Doreen and I do invite, and our students know that about us, because I've spoken to many faculty members, like, no one ever comes into my office. It's like, I tell them.
Have you thought about that?
Thank you for saying that, Melissa. Yes. Yes. And so that was the first step. But then she was also a part of helping. How do we help build this too? Because she also saw it from a different. You're absolutely right. Of being like, she was one of the newest hires at this organization. And I will say it was a smaller family owned, so they hadn't had new hires, right? It had been this space like, oh, this is just how we talk, this is how it's been, but it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it acceptable.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that piece is so huge. We've always done it this way. It's always worked before. Okay, it worked in that environment in that time with that group of people, with that kind of connection relationship. You've brought a new facet in, and your intent is to continue to do that. This doesn't work anymore. There's not that history or that background and all these different things. And stop and think, if you're the only one that looks like you in that space, have you stopped to think about the impact of that, of what you're doing on someone from outside that circle? So it just makes you stop and think. And I think that's the biggest thing. The takeaway I want people to have today as they listen to this: have you stopped and considered? When's the last time you said thank you? Have you asked them if they want to be doing this anymore? Have you asked them if they'd like help? Have you asked them if they want to be done with it, or do they love it and but they just want to be affirmed and appreciated? Recognize them at the staff meeting. Gosh, Sally, you always show up and do this. You always clean up the kitchen after our events. No one's asked you to do that. You just always do it. And we appreciate it. And we see you and we thank you. My gosh, that goes so many miles. But also, Sally, do you want to do it anymore? Would you like some help? Would you like to create a rotating calendar? I mean, there's just so many things, to consider. Okay.
And Melissa, it's so great. I love that you say stop and see, because that's a series that we've had.
Wow.
Panels, because we also, like, at the end of each chapter, that's what we call them mirrors. And whether you're holding up that mirror or looking in the mirror to yourself, or sometimes we, as mentors, as sponsors, we hold up a mirror to others.
Yeah.
Right. And so that same idea of the stop and see is take that mirror moment.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I talk about that we go, 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 go. And we're in a capitalistic society where it's produce. Yes. And we don't stop and consider all the time the human impact. I mean, there's all throughout these stories, there's that impact on our mental, emotional, physical health when we don't take the time to recognize these things. And we're not just talking about workplaces. I'm talking about when you're in your home space, partners, Kids, are you noticing these things? Or are you the ones it's happening to? Are you communicating, listen, because I think sometimes as women, we're like, I can't believe, we get very martyr and very like, can't they read my mind and see this is driving me crazy? Can they not see the look on my face and see
They can't.
that was sarcasm? No, they can't. We
They
cannot
can't.
make those assumptions. And that really goes nicely into what my next point is here is we talk a lot about on this network about women prioritizing their self-care. It's not selfish. We talk about setting healthy boundaries, the connection between mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health, living out of our own expectations versus others, and communicating those healthy boundaries and expectations. We can't just have them, we have to communicate them and not make the assumption that people just know, especially when we're making a shift. Like we're like, I've had enough. People are not recognizing the body language. It's time to speak up and say something. And this invisible work is just in direct conflict with that because there can be fear about pushback. There can be what I call weaponized gratitude that gets used a lot on people. I did a whole episode about this on our podcast. In season 2. I don't know if I coined the phrase or not, but I use it. I haven't even heard anyone else use it. But it's that situation where you come and you bring up something that's not working. And it might be a child to a parent. It's a worker to a coworker to a teammate or a supervisor. It happens in all kinds of spaces with your parents, all these places where you like, I'd like to talk about something that's I don't think is really working anymore, or it's having this impact on me. And you get back, well, you should be grateful. I gave you this opportunity. You're the only one in the room that looks like you. There's no other women in leadership here. That's so selfish. How can you just, and it's like, no. I did not say I wasn't grateful. I did not say I did not appreciate that opportunity. That is you imposing that upon me. That is your thought in your head. Yeah. Just because I should be grateful doesn't mean that I should just settle for these other things that need to improve or impacting my health. So that both and so I'm very aware of the weaponized gratitude piece. It's played a huge role in my life. And most honestly, women that I know or anybody that's in a situation where they don't have the power. And like I said, it happens a lot in the generation I grew up. It was like, if I tried to bring up a problem, I was being the selfish little bratty kid. Sit down and shut up and be thankful you've got a meal at the table and a roof over your head. I mean, that, so when you hear that from the time you're a little kid, and especially as little girls, with these scripts that we get, and then you're growing up, it's not, you just kind of go and do because that's what society expects. But then you hit this wall at some point and you realize, like, wait a minute. This is not serving me anymore. So talk to me about that the kind of crash of realities and the need to kind of express being frustrated people don't see, but infusing people that are in these positions of the invisible work of infusing them with the empowerment that it's okay to say something and do something about it.
So it's one of those things that actually from the beginning when we talked about how we had the different tone of the book, right? And so I think that's got to be one of them because I think, frustration happens when we let something go too long, right? Yeah. But sitting that frustration for a second and understanding that little bit of that, and this is like, there might be, but some of that frustration is us not communicating it, right? Because like you said, we make assumptions about what people, because we are oftentimes very maybe empathetic ourselves, right?
Yes.
And I know that if I see a change in my daughter's behavior, I notice it and I know something's up. But not everyone is like that, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone has that, and not everyone is paying enough attention to that. So first of all, is to realize, okay, let's try to have the conversation. And so I'm going to use an example. I'm going to pick on my spouse a little bit on this one, but it is a really, really what I think is a good example of how we have to approach this. So we were having this kind of jokingly conversation with some friends, and it came out that, you know, my husband, he's the one who does the dishes and he does the laundry, and then so they were having this conversation, and so someone said, they said, well, you know, if you do the dishes and you do all the laundry, like, well, what does Doreen do? Like, she must do the outside work, right? And then his response was, well, no, we hire someone for that, because it was like to mow the lawn and, you know, that type of thing, to do the outside work. And they were like, well, what does she do? Right. And so I waited for my husband's response, and he didn't say anything. And so we just kind of laughed it off. But then to me, it was like, no, that needs a conversation. Right. So what I did was I actually went and I said, okay, you know, I know that was just a joke, and I know that was the platform, but I said, but let's actually think about this. Right. And so then I went through and I talked about some of the invisible things, like, you know, well, who was it that got, you know, made sure our daughter had clothing this year when she started school? Who made sure she had her school supplies? Who makes sure that she has the birthday presents for the, you know, birthday parties that she goes to? Who makes sure that she actually gets invited to those and responds to those? And so I was going through all of these things that are not just the laundry, not just cleaning the bathrooms, or not just, so those big ones of people. And then it was this realization. And so we now discuss it. Right. So if we're going to be doing like a spring cleaning, it's like, okay, well, here's all the tasks. Who's taking what? And it helped me take the negative out of it, because I'm like, okay, here's the whole things that have to be done. I'll take part of it, but everybody else has to take some of it too. Right. And so it's an idea of just bringing voice to it. So in the workplace, the same idea, you know, let's say that there are, you know, one of the things that we forget about is that culture in an organization takes work, right? Creating those cultures that people love, creating those cultures that get, the people the best place to work in the U.S., whatever the case may be, right? But that takes that work that's not usually assigned to someone's job. Right. So if we look at that, though, what are those things? That is maybe making sure that we recognize birthdays. Maybe it's making sure that once a month we have, you know, a luncheon with our manager. Maybe whatever all those tasks are, again, line them out, and then let's divide them out, because it's important to all of us. Right. So I think that from a kind of going back to that idea, what kind of tactical things do you do? Because it is easy to sit in anger, but anger only hurts us. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not going to help the situation. Right. And so that's really that idea of, okay, well, what's really aggravating me? Let's name it. Let's put it out, and then have it so that it's a shared discussion about how can we move forward, because the invisible work needs to be done. I'm not, you know, Janelle and I are never going to say that, well, everyone just stop doing it, because, you know, no one really, it's important things. It's what makes our homes warm and makes our homes a place where we want to be. It helps our kids grow. All these things have to be done, but we as women don't have to do it all. Right. And so but it has to be named first. So.
Yeah, it has to be. Somebody's got to make the doctor appointments and dentist appointments and make sure people get there. That's another thing I thought of when you were naming those things. Because that's the things that I do.
Exactly, right. And so, but the other thing too, though, I have to do though, is that when I sit back and I don't do the dishes, I have to not be guilty about that. And that was probably the most difficult thing for me, because so if I sit down after supper and I'm going and I'm actually in my head doing a checklist of, okay, did we get the orthodontist appointment? Did we get the, you know, that it may not look like I'm doing anything. I may just look like I'm sitting there. And then I have this guilt of, oh, well, someone's doing the dishes, so I have to get up and do. No, if we have this division, then we have to respect it and know that we don't have to do everything. So that was actually one of the things that was difficult for me, was to actually once in a while just sit back and let somebody else vacuum. Like, it's okay, right? So how do we do that? Yeah.
And if they don't do it like you do it, it's okay. That's the one thing. My husband and I have a very different way of loading the dishwasher.
Okay.
Each other's way drives the other one crazy. And we had to get to a point where if it was our week or our time to do the dishes, we were just going to walk away. and let them do it.
Exactly.
And be happy that they were doing it. And not feel guilty piece, because then again, your head's like, it's not like you're spinning with all the different things. Our minds are going all the time with all these things that have to be done. But I also want to come back to too, before I go to Dr. Wells, in that sometimes people really love doing things. And I've seen this happen where you think you're doing the right thing by like, you know what? Going back to Sally, she's been carrying this load for a while. We're going to divide things up and we're going to make sure that everybody's carrying load. Sally's all of a sudden like, I really like doing that. I must be doing a terrible job. So, and that's something I really value and appreciate about getting to do. So also that communication piece, again, making sure they just want to be thanked. They're not asking you to take the work away. They just want to be acknowledged and appreciated for it. But make sure they know that if you do appreciate it, not trying, and if they are like, no, I'm good, just a little thank you or acknowledgement, or, so I think that communication, just that whole communication.
Really good point. Absolutely, Melissa. That's a really, really important piece. Don't making the assumptions about, because again, putting what you would project onto it, right? So absolutely, because sometimes it is that thing that, may drive you nuts. Like you might not like it. It might be something that might be very annoying to you. But then, to somebody else, it's a nice break from the office. It's the other office work that they were doing, or something, a nice little break for them, or it's the way that they get to communicate with other people in the office, or that they get to keep their connections, whatever. So absolutely not making those assumptions around that is a huge, huge piece of it. Thank you for bringing that up. That was really important.
And Melissa, you must be reading our mind and knowing what's next in the pipeline, because moving from our invisible work into the appreciation project. Because now that we can identify this work, as you just said, in Doreen, it's okay, let's say all the tasks that need to be done, right? But how people like to be appreciated for it, because it's not always going to be, and we've said the invisible economy will always be there, right? Not everyone wants to be paid, right? Maybe it is, as you said, that simple thank you, that acknowledgement, those words of affirmation, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a gift, right?
Yeah. Shout out in a
high, right? A shout out in the newsletter. Absolutely. So now that we've identified what is all the work, how do you want to be appreciated or acknowledged for this invisible work? So that's kind of where we're going with that. So thanks for planting that seed you didn't even know, or watering
there we
the
go.
seed that you didn't know.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate. It's all part. It's so interesting because these things have been happening for thousands of years. They've had their variations due to technology and the industrial revolution and all those kinds of things of how it shows up in our world, but this is not new stuff. So I think when I first talked to you all, I'm like, how are we just now having this? How is this just now happening? But also thank God that it is, because it's way overdue. And most people, when you start laying it out, they're like, oh, I mean, I don't, unless you're just a horrible person, and there's those out there that exist. I mean, let's not miss that. There are some, men that aren't going to get this conversation. They've got very firm ideas on what roles are and they'll go back to that weaponized gratitude. And some, women in higher positions too, that have just forgotten what it's like to be there, and that just that does exist. We don't want to ignore that or pretend it doesn't, but so many times, I'm going to say I don't know, at least 8 out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10, when you bring it up, when you present it in a way that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you haven't seen that. That's going to put people on defensive. And I'm preaching to the choir here, because I'm the number one offender. I have had to really learn in my life to be mindful, take a breath, sit with it for a minute, decide the best approach, step away if you're feeling, because you talk, I think that's so important. You talk about that first volume, getting out the angst. You got to get that out. You needed to do that. That was an important part of your process of getting to this finished product, but also a reminder of wow, this has really had an impact on me. Because I think we don't, until we sit with it, we don't realize, wow, this really, I had more stored up here than I realized I did, sitting within all this. And so that was in order for you to create what you did in the way that you have, to make it feel so approachable and receivable. You had to work through that part.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. It's not, yeah, absolutely. And, and you talk about people realizing, and so I'm going to, another story, if you'll let me just to share.
Yeah.
So I had an individual read the book, and he's mid-70s, and he has 2 grown adults for children. And it was interesting because of all the people that I know, him wanting to read the book, first of all, was not something I was expecting. And then second of all, for him to have read it. And it was interesting. So when he came into the room to talk to me about it after, and he was like, Doreen, I don't know how the girls got to adulthood. And I realized after reading this book that I really don't know how they got there. Like, there was so much that was done for them that his wife, she just did for me. And it was really this take back for him that it was like this revelation for him. Like, he got emotional, right? Wow. Because he was like, I have taken for granted all these years, because his youngest is 25 now, right? For all of these years, I've taken for granted that things were just going to get done and that they were okay. But there was so much that my spouse was doing to make that happen. And to me, it was this, so if we have these conversations and just say, let's think about this together, right? That's what really, as far as, I think I've jokingly said this to Janelle. I said, well, after that, I'm okay. If nobody else reads the book, it's okay.
Yeah, no kidding.
There was at least that one moment, but it was this emotional reaction that he had to it that really got me. And I was like, wow, okay, he really didn't get this. He really missed this. And for him to actually have that after reading the book, it was really, really a positive thing. And so understanding we have frustration and we deserve that frustration. It's okay to have that frustration, right? But to move past it, right? We have to find ways that are going to be those clear communications that we can understand the whole context, right? Because every context is going to be completely different. That's another important thing to realize, right? And so how can we understand that context and move through it?
Yeah. Yeah.
One more practice I would say, and we use it a lot, and you have to use your emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
But I would say knowing the people or the sense of community. But we're in times that we've never been. People are living longer, right? We're not this sandwich generation. I say we're a panini because it's a hot press sandwich with elder care, child care. And so what we constantly use is, I think it's time to recalibrate. And I say this to my husband. We can say this in the workplace. We can say this in my PTO meetings. We can say this in all the other service board memberships I'm a part of. It's time to recalibrate, right? And we just did it. Like, I have 3 active children, right? From ages 14 to 9. Our careers are thriving between my husband and I. We have elder care that we're responsible for. Our parents are aging. There's things that we've never experienced before. It's time to recalibrate. And we just did it hockey season ended, but lacrosse is coming on. Well, guess what? Now those practices aren't Monday, Wednesdays. They're Tuesday, Thursday. So we've got to recalibrate the calendar. And so it's sitting down. And so that has been the way that we're able to break the ice. And I don't come through that anger because I'm carrying all that load. It's time to recalibrate. This could be in the workplace as well. Yeah. Right. And maybe I love doing this work, but someone new is coming in and now I'm getting more on my plate. So is it time to recalibrate?
That's such a non-defensive stance to take to that it invites people in. Let's look at this, because I talk about all the time, step back every once in a while and make sure that your values and your why are still in alignment with your calendar. Make sure that you're still feeling, when you look at your calendar, if you're getting angsty about everything that's on there, all right, are we out of alignment? Is it time to recalibrate? I love that word. And look at where our boundaries are and where they need to be adjusted. What is our why and our values now? And does that align with what I'm putting my time and energy into? Same kind of thing. It's a recalibration, an invitation in, because I think too, so many times people will hear that are like, oh, my boss or my husband or my wife or my, PTO board member or whatever it is, my, women's leadership ministry leader, they'll never be receptive to this. Don't just jump to that conclusion. Let them sit with it, but think about your language. I have got some ideas on how we might recalibrate. Would you be open to listening to me? I mean, that is way more like, you know what? I'm seeing some stuff that's not going so well here. And I think you need to sit down and take a listen. That, that's my first approach. Never goes well. I've had to learn. But I mean, it's so much of it too is how you introduce it. And so being thoughtful about that when you bring that. Oh gosh, we could talk about this forever. But I want people to read the book and look at your work. So when you think about your own lives, how do you take care of yourself, set healthy boundaries around your time, communicate? Dr. MacAulay used a great example earlier of that communication you had with your husband later. Like, yeah, kind of funny and light in the moment, but actually we need to have a conversation about this. Outside, on our own, not in front of the whole gang, and make everybody uncomfortable, but stepping away, we need to have that conversation. So, Dr. Wells, you're running around between lacrosse fields and hockey rinks and everywhere in between, getting the kids to school, out the door, to blah, blah. I mean, all the things. I was there 10 to 15 years ago. I'm like, just hang on. Thank you. You can do this. But how do you take care of yourselves, refresh yourselves? Because this is also emotional labor. I think we miss that, this kind of work, there's an emotional labor, especially when you're a woman who many times is carrying a lot of these own invisible workloads in your own life. To create your own practices around. So talk to me about how you care for yourselves, activities that nourish you, how you decide, from a healthy boundary standpoint, what's enough and when do I need to step away? And Dr. Wells, go ahead and go first on that one.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And that is why we dedicated an entire chapter to emotional labor. Because again, even as Doreen said, you might not see that work. As women, we know, we hear it. The mental dialogue doesn't ever stop, right? Or the masking of emotions, the masking of our tone, all these things that we have had to do, right? So there's a whole chapter dedicated on emotional labor. But personally, for me, so not just my students, but my kids and my family know I don't have yoga. And for me, yoga is a centering yoga and meditation. So if I haven't done those for that week, everyone knows, and so that is very important. My biggest thing is my calendar. We say everything else gets on my calendar. So why isn't there time for me on my calendar?
Absolutely. Because we put on our calendar the things we value, and that has to include ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And so that has been something to me. I've also had to remind myself to give grace and remind myself that I can't, and I say this a lot, we can't pour from an empty cup. Yeah. And my cup is empty right now. Yeah. So what do I need to do to fill it up? So it's been that. Sometimes it's been a sense of community. I also we moved twice in a 3-year period, moving a family of 5. And so if community didn't exist, how did we build it? Right. And sometimes that's going out and having tea with someone. Sometimes that's, I was learning tennis. I'm learning a new sport in my mid 40s. Great. Right. But it was more for the community to do that. Yeah. And so I have to fill my bucket with that. Other things too is sometimes we do get frustrated. Right. However, we don't sit in that, and I think Doreen and I were just having this conversation about this, is that I might need that release. My frustration, but we're going to problem solve mode, right? Yeah. So I'm like, okay, Doreen, give me that 1 minute. I have a frustration. Okay, what could I do differently? Yeah. How could I be better? What could I control? What could I do? Right? Because I have to be mindful of that, but we don't give it ourselves enough grace, but other people are going through this too. And so, but I don't just want, that shared anger or resentment. I want, again, that shared hope, that shared problem solving to help make it better. Yeah. Okay. So those are a few of the things. Doreen's been a part of them personally, professionally. That's right. But it is really important because I know when I'm not at my best. I know when I'm short fused. I know when I'm absolutely exhausted. My tone does change. I'm quicker to anger. And I have to be very mindful of that as well.
Yeah. And you just nailed the importance of self-care. Nobody wins when they're getting that version of us. Nobody wins. And so that's why this concept of taking care of yourself as women being selfish, like you're all losing in this thing. Yeah. I mean, you don't get the freshest, most delightful version of me when this happens. So let's just recalibrate and consider what version of me you want to experience. And then that, oh, okay. But you also, you pointed out something real that I want to point out too, before we go to Dr. MacAulay on this, is that you take the time to process. Give me a moment. Let me move through this. You don't just like, oh, I don't have time for that right now and stuff it. You got to move through it, feel it. All right, now we're not going to wallow in that. We're going to move through it. We're going to get back to where do I have choice? Because choice, I mean, I think choice in this conversation too, realizing there's a choice, whether it's just simply asking for some recognition that there's but that knowing that you have choice gives you hope. I mean, I think that's a big part of it too. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Dr. MacAulay, how do you take care of yourself?
Well, I'm going to be very honest with your listeners and say that I'm not great at this. So I'm a work in progress for sure. Definitely. Right. But the biggest things for me that I've trying to incorporate is to say no. I don't have to be the person. It's interesting. Someone, had given me this example of when someone's trained at a theme park. So Disney, for example, right? They're trained not to go and actually bring the person to whatever they want or find whatever it is. They're actually trained to tell them, well, let's get you a map and let them do it themselves. Right. And so this idea of not having to do everything, not having to be the one that physically takes someone to wherever it is that they need to go, but to actually have it so that you can guide someone, right? So that has allowed me personally to be able to say no more. So that's kind of one of the things that I've tried to do. Yes, finding the things, walking is what helps me. I can be a completely new person if I come back from a walk. So finding that, and if you can, the closer I can get to a tree, the better I am, right? So if you can get me into the woods, that's a very happy place for me. So really taking the time, putting it on the calendar, and actually, this past summer, there was 5 hikes that I really wanted to do. We put them on the calendar and we made it so that it was a family priority. So doing that was another one that I've really, really helped. That the other thing is, and this goes back to finding the words that work for you. So this was a conversation I had recently with someone, and the individual said that boundaries is a word I struggle with because I feel like it's so, it's so different. And I'm not that person who's very, stern and I have a bit. And her version was, it's me protecting my peace. And so what she says is that I need to protect my peace. And then to all of what Janelle said about being, so if I can protect my peace, then I can be that person who shows up with a better attitude, with a better ability to engage with you, with, that other version that I really like of myself. Right. So I think the other thing we can do is find the language that works for you. What's that little mantra of that works for you? So if it's finding your peace, if it's setting your boundary, if it's, finding your better you, whatever your mantra is, own it and embrace it and keep that as your kind of reminder that you are worthy, you need the time, and you put your own oxygen mask on first, right? Like that, and you have to be able to do that, right? So just that would be the things. But like I said, I am definitely, anyone will tell you, a work in progress when it comes to this for sure.
Yeah, no, I think we all are. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes we have to hit walls, and that's why I do this work. Like, don't hit the wall.
Yes.
Get yourself care for. But I like the language piece you brought up because I hear this sometimes too. I'll hear, I don't like self-care. That's too trendy, or boundaries feel like a wall. Caring for my wellness.
Yes.
Filling my cup. Yeah. My son-in-law uses the guideposts rather than boundaries. That feels less inhibiting to him. So it's the concept behind it. It's that practice of making sure you're tending to yourself, that not being afraid to say no piece. Man, I can tell you, I have done about close to 120 episodes on the podcast and doing these panels now. At least 50% of the women I talk to say that that's been the most important thing to their caring for themselves, is learning to say no. And it's like, it sounds simple, but we have a hard time with it because we are sure that only we can be the grandest of grand parent volunteers on every field trip. And or whatever your thing is. Yeah. It's like, oh no, there's others there. They'll figure it out. Absolutely. But no, not right now. maybe later,
Yes.
not in this season of life I'm in, but let's touch base in a year or 6 months or whatever. But yeah, and not answering right away. Like when if you're having a hard time saying no, just be like, can I have a day or two to think about that? I need to consult my calendar. Maybe you don't really need to consult your calendar, but you need to not make sure you just have a knee jerk. Yes, of course I can do that. Because not all good things are forced. So I'm so glad you brought that up. That simply learning that it's okay to say no can go a long way into that conversation. All right. Let people know. So wellsquest.com. Talk quickly, not too quickly, but accurately. I want to be respectful of your time. But talk about that's the website where people can find the book. They can find how to work with you. That will be in our show notes, folks, as well as on our website, throughout our socials, embracinglayers.com. Follow us on our socials. That'll be there. But talk to me about that work and how that came to be and how you help people and support people there as we wrap up today.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that invitation. So it's Wells Quest, www.wellsquest.com. And there's a whole tab about our invisible work. And we want this to be in one space, right? Because it is all interconnected, right? Me showing up my best at work, me showing up the best at home, me showing up the best in my community. Okay. There is overlap between them. And we started Wells Quest. I look back, there were some things as I came up in sports, right? Yes, I was a collegiate athlete. I was a collegiate coach. I'm married to an athletic administrator. I'm a sport educator. But then we also did the partnership with the Lightning. So that is our program has a partnership with the Lightning. And I worked a lot with their HR department. And what we were realizing, not with just the Lightning, but in sports in general, it's so progressive on a court, pitch, or ice. But if we pulled back that curtain, sometimes it is still around like the mom and pops. And so we've invested so much in developing the talent on, again, the pitch, the ice, the court. But what about our talent of our people, our employees? Okay. And so more and more, we were able to partner. Now, with Doreen and the partnership there, we were able to even expand that even outside of sports, right? Which has been beautiful with Doreen's background in hospitality. And so that has been, but we've seen it. So we've enjoyed not just emerging markets, I would say, but our focus has been on the mid-level people leaders. And that's because there's so much out there in the offerings that are to new people leaders or executives, but who's powering everything, right?
Who's making it go every day?
Yes. And so we say this power to the middle. And we do have, like you have a community. We have a community of the Middle Power Collective. It's really important because we want them to find each other, share best practices, right? Because sometimes right now, particularly after COVID, they haven't felt like they've been invested in as humans. So we've created this sense of community in there. The hallmarks too that we have of Wells Quest are learn, lead, and lift, right? Sometimes today we brought meaning. We're learning about a new topic, right? Oh, I didn't know. Doreen used a term earlier, feed forward. And your head might just look, what is that term? Right? What does that mean? So we first want to learn and give the knowledge, right? Then we want to lead. All right, how do you put this in practice? And then as you said, Melissa, earlier, we have to lift. We have to lift others. As we're climbing, we're lifting others as well.
Right.
And empowering them. So those are really the hallmarks of it. We also, I think another important thing is we're monthly contributors to Psychology Today in this Our Invisible Workspace. And so that has been really fun. We're about 8 months, I would say, Doreen, onto this journey, but it's, again, that constant drumbeat. So again, we can bring not just words and bring value and bring light to this.
Okay. Oh, so good. I love that you tended to that mid-management piece because I remember this a couple of years ago. My husband was working for Texas Tech at the time, and I totally feel your journey. He was in college administration, thought he wanted to be an AD for the first 15 years, realized he was never at home. Our middle child, he came home one night and she was like, who's that? It was like, wait a minute, gonna recalibrate, maybe not that. But he's continued, he's a VP for an advancement now. So he didn't get that far away from it. But within that, a couple of years ago, when he was at Texas Tech at the time, he was like, I need to find something for my middle managers. He's like, I've got all these things that I do with my new people when they come on board. And myself and these others, we get to go to these other case conferences and different things that are happening. But what exists, I need to pour into them. And he found something that he could do, but it was that realization of like, that's a space that gets forgotten about. Again, going back to invisible work, not that, but kind of, gets left out of the equation in these things. So I love that you're doing that. I think that's so powerful.
Yes. Thank you. We're excited to do the work.
Yeah, that's great. And so Dr. MacAulay, did she invite you into this the same time as she invited you into the book? It's like, let's do this book. And also I got this other thing for you.
Yes, that's probably not the way it went. Yes, absolutely. So we actually, she had mentioned we started on that course together. I think that's when the synergies really hit. And so then, so absolutely. So it was just after COVID. We thought, okay, well, let's work together. And it's actually one of those things that I had, we talk about working in a team together. I had been kind of a little bit timid to go do that kind of thing and to get into, but we had a lot of work around COVID because everyone was in this virtual space that we were being asked to do things. And so I started seeing that, oh, wait a second. Yeah, the stuff that we're teaching in the classroom is really relevant to individuals in the workplace. So that's when I was like, okay, yeah, I can get into the academic umbrella and actually go out there. And definitely Janelle helped my confidence in that piece, right? And saying, yes, let's go do this together. And so, it's been great to go with the team. And actually, she mentioned the Learn, Lead, Lift. And I actually, that's what hooked me, right? Because Janelle, actually, in Janelle's, phrase of it that she uses for her own guidance, is she uses love first, love, learn, lead, lift. And that it really was this guiding light, this guidepost of everything that I wanted, right? To be able to actually take people on journeys. It's not just about throw you some knowledge and here, hopefully it works well for you. It was this idea of let's teach you a really important concept. Let's show you how to integrate it into, your leadership skills and then be able to lift the entire organization as a result of it. And so to me, she hooked me with that. I was like, oh yes, we are on the same page. And I think if anyone is lucky enough to work with people that bring them that much joy, take it when you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, so good. All right. Where can we know about wellsquest.com, but Dr. Wells first and then Dr. MacAulay, tell people where they can follow you and find you from a social standpoint.
Well, we're all getting better, right? We're all growing and developing, but yes, like personal channels. We do have personal channels. I'll start first with WellsQuest. Probably our biggest one would be either on LinkedIn for WellsQuest and then Instagram.
Okay.
And it's at WellsQuest is the handle. Personally, I'm Doc. It looks like Jules, JE, and then Wells on Instagram, as well as I am on X. And then I would say LinkedIn would be the best, but LinkedIn and Instagram.
Okay, great. And Dr. MacAulay, how about you?
Absolutely. So definitely, like I said, the WellsQuest would be the main one. But if you want to find me on LinkedIn, I'm under Doreen MacAulay. So DOREEN and then MacAulay. You can see it there in the screen. And then on Instagram, I'm Doc MacAulay. So just DOC and then MacAulay is where you can find me there. So yeah, absolutely. We would love to engage with anyone who's listening today. And we'd love to have more, information about your stories, right? So share that with us as well. So please do reach out to us. We are definitely people who are always looking to engage, help, empower, and learn from others as well. We love to learn as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that continuing to learn piece. That's what makes us so good at what you do. Is you're continuing to learn and evolve and grow. And that's what great learners and great teachers do. Oh, thank you so much for this time today. We could talk forever, obviously, but what you're doing in the world is so important. I just want to thank you for it. Ladies, folks listening, all of you, check out their socials. Get this book. Get this book. No matter what season of life you're in. I mean, think of the impact that it had on the man in his 70s that Dr. MacAulay was talking about earlier. It's for everybody. just to bring awareness to this topic and what your place in it is, because it's going to be a both and. There's going to be spaces where you're the one doing the work, and there's going to be spaces where the ones around you are doing the work, and you can be aware. So it is so beneficial. Thanks for putting this work out in the world to both of you. I appreciate so much your time today. That wraps up this episode of Together We Feel. We've kept you here for plenty of time, but I wanted you to get to know these women and why it is they do what they do, and invite you into feeling like that you can be part of this too, because this work is for all of us. It's not just for some people. We all play a role, and that's why it's our invisible work. So thanks so much for being with us today. Take care and have a great week.